So this video is going to talk about the question of why do we have a property system, or maybe more accurately, what do we hope to get out of it? And there are any number of theories about why we have or should have property rights, and there's multiple approaches possible. And this video is just going to focus on one of them, one that has had a good deal of success in the American legal system, both with judges and with academics. And we might call this utilitarian theory, we might call it social welfare theory. Now, these terms mask an awful lot of extremely subtle and important distinctions, and we are not going to cover those in this video. I'm going to be discussing them at a fairly high level of generality. So if you're an economist or a philosopher, please forgive me. The basic idea is that property rights promote overall social welfare, that we are better off with property rights than without them. And in this video or series of videos, I'm going to talk a little bit about the purported benefits of this idea, as well as discuss some of the potential costs. The purpose here is to explain the argument, not to necessarily endorse or challenge it. My personal view is that property systems make sense in certain contexts, but not others, and it's worth exploring under what circumstances property rights may be the best way of solving particular societal problems, and when they may be lacking. So from this perspective, this social welfare perspective, people often forward two sets of possible benefits of property rights. The first one goes to what we might call conservation or efficiency benefits. The basic idea is that in certain contexts, property rights help us get the most out of what we have, that they eliminate certain problems that may arise in settings of common ownership. And the classic example of this argument is to imagine a shared pasture with no rules and multiple farmers who want to raise cattle. And what happens in that situation? Well, one possibility is that there is a race to consume the grass. The idea being that no individual cattle owner has an incentive to limit their herds grazing of the field. If they don't get out there, someone else will get their cattle on instead. And so why not get what you can while the getting's good? And because there's no shared incentive to conserve what's there, the field is overconsumed and eventually incapable of sustaining any cattle. This dilemma is traditionally referred to with the name the tragedy of the commons. And so if we have a tragedy of the commons, how do property rights potentially help? So imagine a particular rancher gains ownership of a parcel of pasture land. Now they have an incentive to conserve the land and prevent congestion. So they may charge a fee for other cattle owners to bring their cattle onto the land, but the owner has an incentive to make sure not too many come onto the property. And by charging a fee, they reap the benefit of maintaining productivity of the land into the future, thus extending the value of the land into the future. They have internalized the externality that comes with the possibility that the land will be depleted. That is, if the land is depleted and no longer capable of sustaining cattle, the owner of the land bears the consequences and therefore has an incentive to extend the value of the land into the future. And so in everyday life, people sometimes refer to the difference between owning a home and renting a home, or owning a car and renting a car. There's a saying that no one ever washed a rented car, and that's the idea, that if one owns something, they have an incentive to preserve its value into the future in a way that they would not have in a setting in which there is no ownership. Of course, this raises the question of which of the ranchers gets to own the property, but that's a separate question from whether or not property rights might be helpful in preventing the so-called tragedy of the commons. Another way in which property rights might help is by allowing alienability of resources, by allowing the land to be sold or leased to the party who can get the highest benefit from the land. Perhaps the land is most efficiently used as pasture land. Perhaps it's more efficiently used as a hotel. And if the property rights are alienable, the owner of the land can sell to the entity that is willing to offer a sum of money reflecting the value they might be able to get out of the land. In this way, property rights may lower transaction costs. Whereas before, if there was an effort to convince everybody that the pasture is better used as a hotel, there would have to be generalized, widespread agreement, and that might be hard to get everybody to sign on to the proposal. If one person owns the land in question, there's only a buyer and a seller, and the transaction costs of getting a change are correspondingly lower. Another potential benefit of property rights in this situation is that there may be certain customary expectations among users of land that they, in a lay sense, in a colloquial sense, own that land, and that expectation is not backed up by any kind of legal entitlement, and that may lead to reliance on self-help and the possibility of what I referred to earlier as the 12-gauge solution, and maybe recognizing stable rights in a resource reduces the need for people to guard what they would think of as their, in scare quotes, their land 24/7, or to create some kind of investment system in fences or the like. Maybe it reduces certain kinds of conflict. So that's the first set of benefits, this idea of efficiency, getting more out of what you have. Another set of benefits can be described as being more about incentives, that by having property rights, you have an incentive to invest in improvements of a particular resource. So going back to the example of the pasture, the owner of the land doesn't just collect rent, there's now a reason to use fertilizer or install an irrigation system or make other improvements that are going to make the land more productive. And the argument is that the incentive was lacking before, because even though the costs would be concentrated on the person who builds the improvement, the benefits would be spread across multiple actors, that everyone will get to share in the benefits, but wouldn't be obligated to share in the costs. Now, again, everyone could have agreed to work together, but then we have this issue about transaction costs. But hold that thought, because it becomes important to the critique of this theory of property. So another example of the same idea is home improvement, that if you are renting a home, you're unlikely to invest the money necessary in remodeling the kitchen or painting the house or that sort of thing, because the extent to which it increases the value of the property, you as the renter don't get to share in that value, whereas you're much more likely to engage in a home improvement project if you are the owner, and you will be able to capture the increased value of the house through your efforts. And the important thing to understand is, with these arguments, it's not just a matter of benefiting a particular property owner, or not just a matter of improving the value of a resource for its own sake. The idea is that society will benefit as a whole. If farmland is put to more productive use, that means that more food is produced from the land. If more food is produced from the land, that should lower the price of the food for society at large. Likewise, nice homes produce more tax revenue, perhaps more attractive neighborhoods, and those benefits spill over to society at large. For example, more tax revenue means more money for schools, that sort of thing. And so the fundamental case for property rights in these kinds of settings is that the benefits that are being described here may not be created without the ability of the property owners to capture those benefits by being able to control what goes on their properties. So we have been describing what we might call the happy utilitarian story of property law. And in the next video, we'll turn to some reasons to question this story and address some of the costs of a property system.